sex abuse crisis. The Vatican says it will be responding to accusations top Vatican officials, including Pope Francis, covered up the sexual misconduct of a now disgraced former American cardinal. Public protest. A deacon in the Archdiocese of Washington writes a letter with a message to Cardinal Donald Wuerl. Closed for business. The Trump administration tries for peace in the Middle East. Why its latest move pleases Israel. And a helping hand. Pope Francis tells the faithful how we can perform miracles. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, September 10th, 2018. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. New tonight, the Vatican responds to accusations that top officials, including the Holy Father, covered up the sexual misconduct of Theodore McCarrick, the former Archbishop of Washington. Lauren Ashburn is on assignment in Rome and joins us now with more. Lauren?
Wyatt, sources within the Vatican tell me that top officials are struggling with the response to this burgeoning scandal, but they have begun to recognize the enormity of the problem and understand that what has been done and said so far is doing little to quell the criticism. They have been having an internal debate about how to engage the issue without compounding the problem. And in that vein, Pope Francis's top advisors said here today that the Vatican is preparing the necessary clarifications about the charges, which originated with former nuncio Carlo Vigano. Members of the church hierarchy covered up for disgraced former cardinal in Washington, Theodore McCarrick. At the same time, the 9 cardinals at today's meeting expressed full solidarity with the Pope in this unprecedented crisis. The key, of course, is going to be the nature of these clarifications and how they are willing to do this in response to the scandal. Also at issue, what to do about the current Washington Archbishop, Cardinal Donald Wuerl, who is under pressure to resign after a Pennsylvania grand jury report accused him of failing to act against numerous priests accused of sexual abuse and reassigning some to other parishes. The Pope met with Wuerl last week and told him to discern his response with his fellow priests. We have learned that the president of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, will be meeting with the Pope here in Rome on Thursday.
Lauren, does this talk of clarification suggest the Vatican realizes that silence is not the way to approach this crisis?
Yes. The Pope, as you'll recall, originally said he would not say one word about the charges in the Vigano letter, but said he may speak later, and then called on journalists to do their job to discern the truth. His Secretary of State, Cardinal Pietro Parolin, told an Italian news agency last week that he was taking the same tack. But as reverberations throughout the media and the church itself are growing stronger, it seems the Pope's advisors are taking note. It's rare that they release a statement after the first of 3 days of meetings. We don't normally have a daily press release, but this time they thought it was necessary. Now, some bishops and priests have also been speaking out about the Vatican's limited responses, and sources here tell me that pushing back on the allegations is not so simple, because the Vatican has needed to pore over documents within its archives to determine exactly what actually happened and to decide with prudence how it should be addressed. There's a strong feeling here that Americans often demand quick answers by the next news cycle, but that it is sometimes impossible based on the complexity of the allegations. Wyatt.
Lauren Ashburn reporting from Rome tonight. Thanks, Lauren. A letter from 2006 confirms the Holy See received information in the year 2000 about the sexual misconduct of Theodore McCarrick. The letter is from then Archbishop Leonardo Sandri to Father Boniface Ramsey, a New York priest who made the initial allegation. It lends credibility to bombshell accusations of a cover-up at the highest levels of the church. Archbishop Carlo Vigano referenced the letter in his testimony about the McCarrick scandal. A deacon in the Archdiocese of Washington says he can no longer assist Cardinal Donald Wuerl. James Garcia serves in the Cathedral of St. Matthew, the Cardinal's own church. 26 days ago, a grand jury report in Pennsylvania accused Wuerl of protecting predator priests. Correspondent Jason Calvi talked with Deacon Garcia.
You say you will not serve your bishop, Cardinal Wuerl, during the Mass. Why?
I felt in the exercise of good conscience that in light of the events of recent weeks, particularly the publication of the Pennsylvania grand jury report, that I could no longer serve or attend to him personally, which I had done in the past.
But how do you square that with the promise you made at your ordination to respect and be obedient to your bishop?
To the issue of respect, I believe my letter was respectful, both in tone and in substance. And as to the issue of obedience, I don't see myself as having been disobedient in making the choice that I have.
The whole order of the diaconate is to serve the bishop at the altar. That goes back to the Bible, and you're saying you're not going to serve your bishop at the altar.
I'm declining to attend to him personally, yes.
Why did you feel necessary then to share that and to get that into the public's eye?
Publishing the letter, which I hope will be read by, among others, survivors. I hope that by publishing the letter, they might take comfort from the reflection that I offered. Another reason, not the primary reason, I think that remaining silent for me personally was no longer an option as a matter of conscience. But I think more generally, silence is a large part of the reason the crisis is where it is today. Remaining silent, I think, with respect to these issues, simply is no longer an option and should not have been an option up to this point. So that's part of my reasoning for publishing the letter.
I want to read to you from your letter to Cardinal Wuerl. I implore you, for the good of the church we both love so dearly, act with courage and humility, relinquish your position as Archbishop. Is that going to solve the problem?
In all honesty, that bolder action is required, but we must begin somewhere. And I think we've reached a point now where, in light of everything that's happened, as I said in my letter, courage and humility on the part of Cardinal Wuerl, to be sure, but also his brother bishops, and all who lead the church, particularly those who are ordained to ministry. Courage and humility requires bold action, and if that means stepping away from one's post so that we can heal and move on, so be it. I reached the decisions and have taken the actions that I did, or that I have, after a good amount of prayer and reflection. I'm entirely at peace with those decisions.
Cardinal Wuerl wrote a letter to priests after meeting with them on Labor Day. He admitted that some of them felt the Archdiocese would be well served with new leadership. Sources in the room tell me the Cardinal got choked up as a good number of priests suggested he should step down. Wyatt?
Jason, is there reaction from the Archdiocese tonight?
Well, the Archdiocese, one of their spokesperson, declined to comment. And so far, Deacon Garcia tells me he hasn't received a response from the Cardinal. But his letter certainly is gaining a lot of publicity. The Washington Post and other outlets have written about him. And now you can read the entire letter. I put it on my Twitter page, Wyatt. That's at @JasonCalvi.
And you've been covering a lot of this information really well the last 2 weeks on your Twitter page. Correspondent Jason Calvi. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks, Wyatt.
The leader of the Archdiocese of Newark has designated Friday as a day of fasting, prayer, and abstinence in reparation for the scandals. Cardinal Joseph Tobin will also conduct a prayer service that night.
I expect that all the priests will join me in the cathedral that evening to beg God's forgiveness and the forgiveness of those who have been abused. I invite you to come and cry out with us, Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, have mercy.
Tobin also says lay people will have a larger role in the Archdiocese decisions, adding, quote, the church can never go back to business as usual. U.S. Representative Ron DeSantis resigns from Congress as he aims to become Florida's next governor. DeSantis, a frequent guest on EWTN News Nightly, sent a letter to Speaker of the House Paul Ryan today announcing his immediate resignation. The Republican says he's spending time campaigning and it would be inappropriate to accept a salary while running for governor. The Trump administration plans to close the main Palestinian diplomatic mission in Washington. It's the latest blow to Palestinians as the U.S. sides with Israel in their long-standing conflict. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. Over the weekend, the Trump administration announced it will cut $25 million in aid to East Jerusalem hospitals serving Palestinians. And now National Security Advisor John Bolton says the doors will shut to the Palestinian Liberation Organization office here in Washington, D.C. because it isn't engaging in talks with Israel.
The Trump administration will not keep the office open when the Palestinians refuse to take steps to start direct and meaningful negotiations with Israel. The United States supports a direct and robust peace process, and we will not allow the ICC or any other organization to constrain Israel's right to self-defense.
John Bolton was also referring there to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, established to prosecute crimes against humanity and genocide. Palestinians want the court based in The Hague in the Netherlands to investigate Israeli military activity in the West Bank and Gaza, but the National Security Advisor claims the ICC is an illegitimate court opposed to both the U.S. and Israel.
We will not cooperate with the ICC. We will provide no assistance to the ICC, and we certainly will not join the ICC.
Bolton made the announcement after the International Criminal Court requested an investigation into alleged war crimes by American troops during the war in Afghanistan, including the abuse of prisoners. One top Palestinian diplomat says the closing of the Palestinian mission in Washington is another affirmation of the Trump administration's policy to punish the Palestinian people. Critics say the decision could increase resistance to the U.S. role as a Mideast peace broker.
And we'll continue to follow to see if there's fallout. White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Hurricane Florence is becoming even stronger as it barrels towards the East Coast. Forecasters say it's now a Category 4 storm with winds up to 130 miles per hour. It is on course to slam into North and South Carolina this week, and people there are stocking up on the necessities. Around 4,000 children are evacuated from a town in Crimea following a chemical leak. The youths will spend roughly 2 weeks at health resorts like this one. They are located in other parts of the peninsula. A local titanium factory is being blamed for the leak. Officials say the firm has suspended all of its work. Syrian forces pound rebel-held areas in the northwest part of the country. Rescue workers say 11 people were wounded. The government, backed by Russia and Iran, has been amassing troops for weeks in preparation for the assault. The UN says a battle could spark a humanitarian crisis because the area is also home to 3 million people. A handful of Chileans officially renounced their Catholic beliefs. Many say their decision was based on the growing clergy sex abuse scandal in the country. The movement began last week on social media. Police have staged several raids on church archives. They're trying to determine what Catholic leaders might have known and kept hidden about abusive priests. There's a lot more on tonight's newscast. Coming up, a Catholic priest tells us why he thinks it's time to turn down the temperature on arguments for and against Pope Francis, and why one of the most powerful executives in television is resigning.
Ma qualcuno può dire, ma padre, noi siamo deboli, siamo peccatori. Questa è un'altra cosa.
Pope Francis says the gospel calls us to a new way of life. At his daily Mass in the Vatican, the Holy Father says Christ transforms us from the inside out by changing our soul, spirit, and body. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. A Canadian priest who has covered the Vatican says it's time to turn down the temperature when it comes to the clergy sex abuse scandal. Father Raymond D'Souza, who's based in Ontario, writes, "The scene at the Vatican appears to have gone from bad to worse, but that does not mean that there is not a reasonable way forward, both in terms of rooting out corruption in the church and restoring a measure of harmony." Father Raymond joins me now. He's editor-in-chief of Convivium and contributor to the National Catholic Register, where he wrote about the issue. Father Raymond, welcome to the program. Why do you think we need to turn down the temperature, and how do you propose we do it?
Well, I think that, Wyatt, we're in unprecedented waters with the senior archbishop, a former nuncio, calling for the resignation of the Pope. I think that makes things more inflammatory. It brings out a lot of defensiveness, even hostility. An investigation is going to go ahead. It's going to be public. It's going to expose a lot of things that we prefer not to see, but it's necessary. But that's going to cause problems for our unity. And I think if we can turn down our rhetoric and at least our sort of back and forth, let's go ahead. I'm not denying that we need a proper investigation, but we're in this together at the end of it for the sake of the gospel. And I think we have to tend to sort of not unnecessarily fraying our bonds of unity.
I want to go back to your earlier point because you say it was a mistake for Archbishop Vigano to call for the resignation of Pope Francis. Now, Ed Peters, one of the most prominent canon lawyers of the church today, disagrees, saying if Vigano's allegations are proven, I think a papal refusal to resign would be a catastrophe for Catholic credibility and unity. So what's your response to that?
Well, we're not at that stage yet, and we've never had that. In living memory, no one I know of that stature has ever called for a pope to resign. And I think Archbishop Vigano should have made his charges in a more measured way. They will be investigated. The American bishops have already committed to that. But the call for a resignation, as you can see in the last 10 days, 2 weeks, has created a very feverish backlash. And I think the matters at issue are serious enough that we could have done without that. There'll be time enough when we know what the investigation shows to entertain those questions. I think it's premature.
So aside from just any potential inflammatory rhetoric, do you see a scenario in which it's appropriate for Vatican officials to resign?
Well, Vatican officials resigning is a lot different than the Pope resigning. I mean, they're two different things. There will be, I think, some resignations, as we've seen already. For example, in Chile, the entire episcopate resigned. That was very dramatic. So there will be, after this investigation is complete, some prelates will step down or retire. That's going to happen. I think that's not controversial, but I think calling for the Pope was a little incendiary.
What more could be done, do you think, to refocus the discussion on victims of clergy sex abuse?
Sincere efforts are being made to listen to them. I think that one of the good things of the Pennsylvania report is that we actually heard some of that raw testimony from victims. And as there are going to be prayer services, holy hours of reparation, discussions in parishes and so forth, it wouldn't be inappropriate to include in a moderate way some of that testimony so that people feel that pain. I think that would be a good thing to do.
Okay, well, we really appreciate your talking about the issue and giving us your insight as well. Father Raymond D'Souza, editor-in-chief of Convivium and a contributor to the National Catholic Register, thanks so much.
Thank you, Wyatt.
Longtime CBS chief executive Les Moonves has stepped down after new claims of sexual misconduct. His exit comes after the New Yorker released a second round of accusations. A total of 12 women allege mistreatment. Moonves denies the claims. CBS will pay him $120 million if its ongoing investigation fails to find any evidence of wrongdoing. We have a lot more coming up after the break, including how Pennsylvania is honoring passengers and the crew killed in the terror attacks on September 11th. And EWTN continues its expansion with a new office in Europe.
O del successo, ma desidera soltanto fare del bene alle persone.
Pope Francis tells the faithful to reach out to those who are suffering from illness and anxiety. At his Angelus address yesterday, the Holy Father said recognizing the needs of others and acting on it can lead to miracles. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. The final piece of a memorial to passengers and crew killed when a hijacked plane was crashed into a rural Pennsylvania field on September 11th is now in place. The Tower of Voices in Shanksville is complete with wind chimes. 40 people were killed when passengers and crew took over the plane from terrorists in 2001. Former State Governor Tom Ridge says the chimes will provide, quote, an everlasting concert by our heroes. A New York subway station reopened Saturday for the first time since it was destroyed in the September 11th terror attacks. Renovations on World Trade Center, Cortlandt Street, had to wait until construction on surrounding towers was underway. A city official says it's more than a subway stop. It's a symbol of New Yorkers' resolve. A recent study by Pew Research Center highlights 7 facts about American Catholics. Among them, there are roughly 51 million Catholic adults in the U.S., and the faithful are split pretty evenly politically, with 47% identifying with Democrats and 46% with Republicans. Joining me now is Greg Smith, Associate Director of Research for the Pew Research Center. Greg, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
The share of American Catholics declined between 2007 and 2014. What do you think accounted for the difference?
Well, there's a lot of things going on, but I think it's important to keep the overall context in mind. Over the last few decades in the United States, we've seen the share of Americans who say they identify with any religion, especially Christianity, including Catholicism. Those numbers have been coming down, while the share of Americans who say they have no religion, those who describe themselves as atheist, agnostic, or just nothing in particular when it comes to religion, that group is growing. And a big part of what's happening is generational replacement. You have an older generation of Americans that's aging, that is beginning to pass away, and as they do, they are being replaced by a new generation of young adults that simply has far lower levels of attachment to religion than their parents and grandparents before them. That's affecting Catholics just like it is among other religious groups.
Another interesting statistic that I was looking at is what's called religious switching. Your data shows that for every convert to Catholicism, which there are some in 2014, but there were 6.5 people who become former Catholics, so people who were maybe raised Catholic but no longer identify as such. So what impact is this happening? Tell me more about this religious switching.
Religious switching is another big part of what's happening in American religion in general. It's affecting every religious group, but for Catholics it's having the effect of basically shrinking the Catholic population from what it otherwise would be. Fully 13% of American adults are former Catholics, people who say they were raised in the church and who no longer identify as Catholic. Today they're Protestant, or say they have no religion, or identify with some other religious group. Now, every religious group loses people through religious switching. Catholics aren't alone in that sense, but what's unique about Catholicism is that they don't replace the people they lose through conversion. There's 13% of American adults are former Catholics, only about 2% of American adults are converts to the faith. And that means that the ratio of people who leave to the people who join is far worse for Catholics than for other religious groups.
Are there any areas where we're seeing growth in terms of the Catholic population?
Yeah, it's interesting. One part of the Catholic population that's growing in the United States is the Hispanic Catholic population. Today, Hispanics account for about 1/3 of all Catholic adults in the United States, and that number is growing. Now, that's not because Hispanics are growing increasingly Catholic. Rather, that's because Hispanics are growing as a share of the overall population. They're disproportionately Catholic, and as a result, the share of American Catholics who are Hispanic is growing.
It's really interesting when you think about all of these trends and ones that we're obviously going to continue to follow. Greg Smith, Associate Director of Research for the Pew Research Center, thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
The Vatican is studying how to care for meteorites and other parts of space that fall to Earth. The 4-day conference began today. It brings together scientists from Europe, North America, Russia, Morocco, and Japan. Finally tonight, one of our slogans here at EWTN is that we're everywhere, and now that includes Hungary. EWTN Hungary celebrated its launch yesterday in Budapest. Our CEO and chairman of the board, Michael Warsaw, was in attendance. The opening ceremony also included Mass. EWTN's 11 networks reach more than 268 million homes in 145 countries and territories around the world. Congratulations to our team in Hungary. I'm sure they and our whole EWTN family appreciate your support and prayers. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.